Thank you very much. So actually you should probably not even be seeing this. Up until very recently I was a philosopher, and the awesome thing about philosophers is that they can actually give decent talks without having PowerPoint. I'm not a philosopher and I can't give a decent talk, but leaving that aside, I was wondering, can I say something useful here? And I don't have any cool demos. I don't have any proper equations or anything like that. Well, I have, however, this strategy thing. I'm thinking about our community, what we're trying to achieve. How can we actually get there? And I talk about it quite a lot. And quite often I end up hearing a lot of people say, no, that's just silly. And it's interesting to try to distill, are they saying something that is useful? So that is why I'm kind of thinking that Naysayers are actually an unpaid focus group. They're actually quite useful. Now, there is one set of arguments against brain emulation that basically, okay, there are ethical reasons or the consequences are really bad. This is not an unimportant issue, but we should leave it aside for this workshop. I might be organizing actually a workshop about the consequences and ethics of brain emulation, probably over at the Mimer Center and for the long-term futures in Stockholm, hopefully this autumn. We'll see what comes from that. There is another thing, and that is, of course, that people say, oh yes, it's just plain crazy. This is usually not very helpful because people who say that something is plain crazy are only looking at surface characteristics. They're actually not evaluating it very carefully why it's crazy. So when you actually try to ask them, why is it self-evident that this cannot work? A lot of them actually can't give that answer and get very, very upset and annoyed at it. But then we get to the really interesting one. One is that brain emulation success cannot be defined. And I think this one is actually a pretty heavy challenge for our community. We need to work harder on this. I had some hand-wavy ideas in the whole brain emulation roadmap. There have been more ideas coming up. I think we need to work harder on actually defining this. Why do we need to do this? Well, it's not just that we need to know whether we have succeeded. We need a metric in the space of what we're doing to see whether we're getting any better. One reason machine learning really took off was it was not just that we had the loss metric for any individual training task, but we also started benchmarking, so you could start comparing yourself on various tasks and see, is my new algorithm actually performing well? If it isn't, maybe I need to do something completely different. If it is, I should be doing more of it. And suddenly you get a gradient following. I fear that a lot of neuroscience, unfortunately, lacks these metrics. We might want to come up with better metrics for that. Then there is another form of naysaying, which I think is interesting. That's the thrown gauntlet. You can't do it because there is not the right technology. And the answer to that is, of course, I'm totally going to make that technology. But this is where the naysayer is actually telling us something interesting in terms of what technology they believe is lacking. And that usually means that we can zoom in and question, is that the right technology and can we make it stop not existing? It's also a bit separate from this talk, but I think this is, of course, what's going to be the bulk of a lot of our conversations. And then there is the final one, which I'm going to focus a bit more about, and that is maybe brain emulation can't work because we can never get the required information. That would be rather annoying. We could imagine worlds where there is a lot of nice technology and a lot of nice metrics, but unfortunately some of the information we need to get our brain emulation working is always locked up inside brains. So one type of answer is kind of Penrose, Hameroff style, oh, it's quantum. And if it was really strongly true, you could end up with a situation where, yep, the mysterious thing that we need is hidden away by the Heisenberg uncertain relation. We can never get at it. The funny thing is Stuart Hameroff actually doesn't believe that. If you read his original book with all the crazy microtubule computation, he actually ends with a future scenario with a brain emulation and uploading going on to microtubule-based quantum computers. So just because something is quantum doesn't mean it's inaccessible, as most of the quantum computing people recognize. But you could certainly have some really annoying forms of lock-in of information here. And this is again a good way of eliciting something interesting from naysayers. A more common version is somebody says, you're leaving out something. Recently I was talking to a neuroscientist who felt like we're totally ignoring temperature. And when you look at the history of long-term potentiation and many of the missteps early on there, that was dependent on that. Actually, it's fairly strongly temperature dependent. So you need to have your culture at the right temperature. That's important. And indeed, you get temperature dependencies in the brain that might have important biological functions. But I think most of us would say, yeah, if it turns out to be so important, I better include temperature terms in it. Maybe I even need to solve a heat equation. Heavens, that's annoying. But it's not mysterious. It's not impossible to do. If haptic communication happens, so action potentials have magnetic fields that tend to synchronize. Oh dear, we might need an electromagnetic solver. A lot of extra work, probably troublesome issues on scanning, etc. But it's not impossible. We just need to get that. And actually getting a good library of potential things to look for is not a bad one. The one that I find interesting, and I'm totally running out of time, so I'm going to be super fast, is the philosophical thing about the difficulty of translation. Philosophers of language have, some of them at least, argued that you can't understand any message from aliens, no matter how elaborate and how much it contains prime numbers and whatnot, because you can't understand, you can't translate because meanings are arbitrary. So there is too much degrees of freedom. So if somebody holds up a rabbit and says gavagai, you don't know whether that means rabbit or food or an undetached rabbit parts. But our priors about humans usually means that we have a pretty decent idea about that it's probably rabbit or food. Undetached rabbit parts is just a term that you hear in philosophy seminars, not among normal humans. Those priors are really important. And this is very similar to the issue about inverse reinforcement learning. You actually need to give your AI priors in order to interpret human behavior. If you don't give it any priors, they actually can't interpret our behavior at all. And that is, oh, the screensaver did, no. The screensaver just told me to shut up here. So just to summarize, I think there are some interesting philosophical issues. I actually think most of them sound really grand on paper, but most of them are not terribly impressive when you get to engineering reality. I think we can use our naysayers to point at these ones, and we should make them part of our research agenda, both explicitly to annoy the naysayers, which is always fun, but also they're actually rather useful because they're cruxes for figuring out stuff. And I'm going to end here without talking about sloppy models and observability and statistics and chaos and manifolds and the topology. Let's do that later. Thank you.
All right. Question? Anyone that hasn't gone yet?
Thank you. I really appreciate the appreciating the naysayers' utility, so I'm going to try to be useful as well. I keep hearing about this whole brain emulation, and I don't understand how it relates to AI alignment. So first of all, emulating does not mean understanding, as we know from large language models and the entire AI revolution at all, right? So you could emulate and in no way understand what's going on and use it to guide you. That's likely to be the outcome from what it looks like to me. And the second point is, okay, let's say even you can emulate and understand a little bit. You can emulate Mahatma Gandhi, you can emulate Donald Trump. Some people will be very excited about one, some people will be very excited about the other. What are you aligning to?
So the second question is interesting because the alignment problem is actually two parts. You are alluding to the second part. What do you align to? The first one is, can you even align in the first place? And I think many people often jump to the second part too early because we don't know how to do the first part. We actually don't know how to make an AI that behaves like Mahatma Gandhi or Trump. That is bad enough because you probably want to at least be able to select. If you instead get something random and very alien, we have a problem. The first part is interesting because brain emulation is kind of weird as neuroscience goes because normal neuroscience and normal science is always aimed at understanding. Having a complete parts list of the brain and an instruction manual that allows you to put them together into something that works, that's not normal science. That's actually not understanding, and that's not normally what you get a Nobel Prize for. The parts list is a very different thing, although it might then become a very powerful tool for understanding, because now you have a brain that you can actually run forward, you can go backward, you can track things, you can do undo, etc. I do think that for alignment, we have a practical purpose. And I think that is also why we're much more on the practical side here than the kind of winning Nobel Prize by a deep insight into true nature of minds and the intelligence side. And that is, if we get something aligned that works, even if we don't quite understand why it works, we are fairly golden. Maybe not perfect golden, maybe silver. If you get something that you can prove that this must always behave really well, it's even better. But that's very, very unlikely in this reality that we ever could get that form of perfect alignment. But people who demand perfect alignment typically get very gloomy because they know that we're light years away from it. People like me think that we can probably get good enough alignment. We sleep rather well at night. We think the question is not easy, but it could be done. Okay, that was my attempt at answer. Yeah.
There will be hopefully a lot more discussion about that in the group work, because I think it's a great question and people have different approaches here and very different opinions.
Are you cutting us off? No. Okay.
You can ask one more.
Just one very quickly. So the structuralism, like linguistics challenge that you're coming up. Can you say something about why we can solve that? We cannot solve it by interacting with the alien. And like if you interact enough with the GABA guy, you can build a pretty good model. Like even if it's super weird, at least you can isolate it in some space.
So the traditional idea about talking to aliens is that it's only radio transmission. That is kind of a big assumption. If the aliens just show up and try to say, take me to your leader, we're going to go into a weird charade and trying to figure out what they want, etc. And at that point, the linguistic philosophers say, no, that is totally doable. You're going to hold up objects and try to somehow indicate what the United Nations or a leader is. It's only that kind of pure semantics traveling over. It was very interesting when a philosopher mentioned this to a bunch of SETI researchers, because all of them started shouting that the philosopher is totally wrong. It was very interesting to see how the different disciplines had utterly alien assumptions going on. Yeah. Oh, we got an AGI universe.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anders.